The first thing you need to know about Dominic is that he didn't look like a king, but he walked like one. He was 48 years old, a man who carried the weight of a powerful, dangerous empire right there in the tension of his shoulders. His clothes were never flashy, always a dark, expensive tailored suit, today a charcoal grey one, that somehow made every other man in the room seem like a cardboard cutout. Dominic had a commanding presence, built on years of silence and steel. His skin was a light olive tone, tanned from expensive vacations, and his hair was thick, dark brown, slightly silvering at the temples, combed neatly back. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They were a piercing, clear grey, usually cool and calculating, giving away nothing. They were the eyes of a man who saw everything but allowed very little to touch him. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. His restaurant, the Pinnacle, wasn't just a fancy place to eat, it was the quiet headquarters of everything Dominic controlled. The main dining room was hushed now, the last of the city's elite had finished their late dinners, the music had been toned down to a near whisper, and the staff was moving efficiently through the final cleanup. Dominic rarely involved himself in the restaurant's day-to-day work, but tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the way the bartender seemed too nervous when he poured the final glass of bourbon, but Dominic decided to take the long way out, cutting through the kitchen. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and steaming heat, but the noise level was dropping fast. He walked past the massive ovens and the hurried dishwashers, nodding once to the head chef who was always the last one to leave. He was heading for the service exit that led to the dimly lit alleyway behind the building, a spot usually reserved for garbage and delivery trucks. He pushed the heavy, metal exit door open just a crack, ready to step out and find his driver waiting. But he froze. He wasn't alone. Tucked into the dark corner, sitting on a turned-over milk crate beside the overflowing dumpsters, was a young woman. Her shoulders were shaking, and a sound like a small, broken animal was escaping her lips. She was sobbing, the kind of deep, silent crying that happens when a person has run out of tears but not out of pain. Dominic knew instantly who she was, Mara. Mara was one of the youngest waitresses, usually working the lunch shift. He hadn't paid her much attention before, but now, he looked. She was tiny, maybe only 22, with warm, brown skin and a thick halo of dark, coiled hair pulled back into a messy bun that was now half falling out. Her eyes, usually a sparkling dark brown, were now puffy and red-rimmed. Her face was the real shock. Just above her delicate jawline, a nasty, purple and blue bruise was blooming. The collar of her crisp white uniform was ripped almost completely off one shoulder, and she was clutching the fabric closed with trembling fingers. The sight didn't just register in Dominic's mind, it landed like a heavy fist in his gut. He slowly pushed the door fully open. The light from the kitchen spilled into the alleyway, illuminating the scene. The sound of the latch clicking was enough to make her jump. Mara scrambled backward, pressing herself against the brick wall. Her wide, scared eyes met his. "Please, Mr. Dominic, I was just leaving," she whispered, her voice raw and barely audible, trying to quickly wipe her eyes with the back of a hand that was shaking too hard to be effective. Dominic didn't move. He stood, perfectly still, his tall frame blocking the light. "You're not going anywhere, Mara," he said. His voice was naturally low, carrying a deep rumble that was usually reserved for giving an order that no one dared to question. But now, it was quiet, edged with an unfamiliar roughness. "What happened to you?" She shook her head violently, her breath catching in her throat. "Nothing, sir. I just fell. On the stairs. I'm clumsy. Please, just forget you saw me. I don't want any trouble." "Clumsy?" Dominic took one slow, deliberate step towards her. "The bruises on your face are from falling on the stairs? And your uniform tore itself." He noticed the way she flinched when he moved, the absolute terror that gripped her small body. It wasn't just fear of being disciplined for resting outside, it was a deeper, more primal terror of something she desperately wanted to keep hidden. "Please, Mr. Dominic," she pleaded, the tears starting to track down her cheeks again, mixing with the soot and dirt of the alley. "Please, don't get involved. I can fix it. I promise I can fix it. Just let me go home." Her words weren't a plea for help, they were a desperate warning. She was begging him to look the other way, to pretend the man who controlled half the city hadn't seen her brokenness. She was sacrificing her own safety for some fear that seemed bigger than him. And that was the moment. That quiet, desperate plea to not get involved. It wasn't the sight of the bruise, or the torn uniform. It was the absolute, raw selflessness of her fear, the way she was protecting something or someone else, even while she was clearly hurting, that unlocked a door in Dominic's memory he thought he had sealed shut decades ago. He remembered a small, frail woman, her face bruised in the exact same pattern, whispering the exact same words to him in a dark stairwell when he was just a boy, small and powerless. His mother. She had begged the men who hurt her to leave her little boy out of it. And they hadn't listened. Dominic was no longer a small, powerless boy. And this wasn't his mother, but the desperation in Mara's eyes was the same, the pain was the same, and the quiet plea to protect someone else was the same. The ice around his heart, the cold armor he wore every day, cracked. He took the final step, his dark leather shoe clicking softly on the wet pavement. He didn't touch her roughly. Instead, he reached out his strong, steady hand and, using just 2 fingers, he gently tilted her chin up. It was a gesture of respect, not force. He looked directly into her frightened, beautiful dark brown eyes. The calculation was gone from his gray gaze, replaced by something deep and dangerous, a cold, controlled fury that had been asleep for years. "Who did this, Mara?" he asked. The question was not loud, but it sounded like thunder in the close, dark space of the alley. It was a question that didn't demand an answer, it demanded a reckoning. It was the question that sealed the fate of the man who had laid a hand on her, and maybe, just maybe, sealed the fate of Dominic himself. Because asking that question meant choosing to step off the safe path he had built for himself, and stepping into the fiery, chaotic world he had sworn he would leave behind. Mara looked at the face of the most powerful man in the city. She saw not the cold, ruthless boss, but a man whose eyes were suddenly flashing with a familiar, terrifying memory. She knew then that she had done exactly what she tried to prevent. She had involved Dominic. She swallowed hard, and the silence in the alley stretched tight, pregnant with destiny. This single, quiet question, spoken by a man who rarely interfered in the small dramas of the world, was the match that was about to light the entire city on fire. The rain started to fall harder, washing the grime off the walls, but it couldn't wash away the shadow of the trouble that had just arrived. Dominic still had his 2 fingers gently holding Mara's chin, tilting her face up so the light from the kitchen caught the fresh bruise blooming on her jaw. He held her there, suspended in the moment of that single, dangerous question, "Who did this, Mara?" Mara felt the coldness of his suit sleeve brush her cheek, but the terror she felt wasn't about him, it was about the consequences of speaking. "It was nobody, Mr. Dominic," she finally managed, her voice barely a scrape against the silence. "I told you, I fell. I am not clumsy, but I was rushing. Please, it's just a job, and I need to keep it." He didn't remove his hand. His gaze, those clear, calculating gray eyes, bored into hers, searching for the lie. He was a master at reading people, especially those trying to hide weakness or trouble. He saw the genuine, deep-seated fear in her dark brown eyes, but he also saw the stubborn refusal to betray someone. "A fall doesn't tear your uniform, Mara," Dominic said, his voice flat and unemotional, which made it sound far more final than any shout. "And a fall doesn't leave a handprint on your jaw." He dropped his hand and stepped back, pulling out a crisp white handkerchief from his pocket. He didn't offer it to her, though. He used it to wipe the grime and a smear of blood off his own fingers. This small, clean gesture in the messy alleyway spoke volumes about the divide between their worlds. "I need the truth, right now," Dominic continued. "If you protect this person, whoever he is, he will do it again. And the next time, you won't be sitting here in a dark alley. You'll be somewhere far worse." Mara broke. Not with a shout, but with a renewed wave of quiet tears. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, exhausted sobs. "He promised he wouldn't," she wept into her torn sleeve. "He promised this was the last time if I just came back late and didn't argue. He said if I tell anyone, he'll make sure I lose my job, my apartment, everything. He said he knows people who can make me disappear." Dominic's gray eyes hardened, growing colder than the concrete beneath his expensive shoes. He didn't need a name anymore, the way she spoke confirmed everything. This was not a random street mugging or a drunken mistake. This was control, fear, and sustained abuse. Just then, the heavy metal door swung open, and Luca, the head chef, poked his head out. Luca was a man of about 50, with a nervous, flushed face and perpetually flour-dusted clothes. He had a deep Mediterranean tan and tired brown eyes that had seen too many late nights. Luca saw Dominic, then he saw Mara huddled and crying, and he froze, fear instantly replacing fatigue. "Mr. Dominic. I didn't know you were still here," Luca stammered, wiping his hands on his apron. "You didn't," Dominic replied simply, not taking his eyes off Mara. "Go inside, Luca." But Mara's crying had stopped. She was staring at Luca with a look of frantic, silent pleading, a look that screamed, "Don't you dare say anything." Luca, however, was already too far gone. He was panicking, trying to piece together the scene, and when he saw the clear marks on Mara's face, his professional fear was momentarily overridden by genuine human sympathy and a flash of anger. "It's happening again, isn't it?" Luca whispered, sounding heartbroken. "That monster, Victor. Didn't I tell you to file a report, Mara?" The name hung in the damp air like a thunderclap. Mara's head shot up. "Luca, no." But it was too late. Dominic turned his entire body to Luca, and the air around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. Luca suddenly realized he had spoken a prohibited name in front of the one person who should never have heard it. Dominic didn't raise his voice, he didn't even move fast. He simply extended his hand, palm up, toward the terrified chef. "Who is Victor, Luca?" Luca felt like he might faint. He looked from Mara's betrayed face to Dominic's stone expression. Her ex-boyfriend, sir. But he won't leave her alone. He's always coming around, causing trouble, trying to shake her down for money. His trash." Luca stopped himself short of saying more, but Dominic's silence was demanding. "Tell me everything you know about this Victor," Dominic instructed. It wasn't a question. Luca swallowed hard. "He used to work for a club in Little Italy, sir. That place, the Bronze Door. He was one of their bouncers. Now, I hear he's moved up. He runs protection for a couple of bars on the east side. He's nothing big, sir. Just a street-level enforcer. Part of the Johnny crew." The information hit Dominic like a physical blow. The Johnny crew. They were not Dominic's rivals in the strictest sense. They operated in different territories, but they were certainly competitors. They were loud, messy, and disorganized, everything Dominic despised. But they were powerful enough to make this more than a personal vendetta. It was now a matter of territory, respect, and organizational threat. Dominic slowly moved away from the door, his eyes still fixed on nothing in particular, processing the information. The fear in Luca and Mara was almost palpable, yet Dominic seemed utterly calm. Suddenly, a massive black SUV pulled up silently beside the alley entrance. The rear door opened, and two men emerged. The first was Marcus, Dominic's head of security and driver. Marcus was a large man, black, with skin the color of dark coffee and a meticulously sculpted, square goatee. He wore a crisp, black suit that seemed molded to his impressive physique. His demeanor was always professionally neutral, his eyes sharp and constantly scanning. He carried himself like an extension of Dominic's own will. The second man was Leo, Dominic's consigliere, his closest advisor. Leo was older, shorter, with pale skin, thin silver hair, and a pair of small, sharp spectacles perched on his nose. Unlike Marcus, Leo rarely resorted to muscle. He used words and ledgers, but his quiet control was often more terrifying. They had seen Dominic's car stopped and sensed the delay. They approached quickly. "Boss? Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his deep voice concerned, instantly clocking the distraught waitress and the nervous chef. Dominic didn't look at them. He just stared at the wet pavement. "There is a problem, Marcus. A small one, but a problem nonetheless," Dominic stated. He finally looked up at his men. His face was a mask of cold displeasure. This young woman, Mara, was injured by a street dog named Victor, who happens to be an enforcer for the Johnny organization. Marcus's reaction was instantaneous and primal. His eyes narrowed, and a vein jumped in his temple. "Johnny? A waiter? That's unacceptable, boss. We clean this up immediately. Tonight." Leo, ever the strategist, simply sighed, adjusting his spectacles. "A move against a Johnny man on our property, even a low-level one, is a statement, Dominic. It opens a door." Marcus took another step toward the alley entrance, his posture already coiled for action. Then let the door open. He laid hands on one of our own staff. It's a disrespect that cannot stand, Leo. We send a message. Mara, seeing the two massive, professional-looking men ready to move, gasped and shook her head, terrified. No. Please, Mr. Dominic, don't. It will only make it worse for me. Dominic held up one hand, a simple, almost lazy gesture. Marcus and Leo instantly froze, their attention snapping back to the center of power. Dominic turned back to the trembling chef, Luca. Luca, go back inside. Forget you saw anything. If anyone asks, Mara slipped on the wet floor. If I hear anything else, anything at all, about Victor showing his face here again, you call Marcus immediately. Do you understand? Yes, Mr. Dominic. Loud and clear. Understood, Luca whispered, backing away, relieved but still shaking. Now, only Mara, Dominic, Marcus, and Leo remained in the rain-streaked alleyway. Dominic looked from the furious Marcus to the calculating Leo, and then settled his grey gaze on the silent, bruised Mara. He took a deep, steadying breath. Then he delivered his command, his voice low, measured, and terrifying in its total control. Nobody touches him, yet. Marcus's jaw dropped slightly. He was expecting rage, a specific target, and immediate deployment. The calm was jarring. Leo's eyes, however, narrowed in understanding. He knew this wasn't forgiveness, it was far worse. Dominic continued, his voice absolutely devoid of emotion. Marcus, I want everything. His schedule, his routines, his gambling debts, his contacts with Injani. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, who he loves, and who he fears. I want to know exactly how much damage striking him will cause to the Jani structure. And I want to know exactly how much pain he caused Mara. He paused, letting the implication sink in. We are not sending a message, Marcus. Messages can be ignored. We are setting a trap. And when we close it, it will be so devastating that Jani will never forget the price of touching what is ours. He turned to Leo. Take Mara to my private residence. Have the doctors check her, quietly. Get her a change of clothes. Set up protection. She is not to leave, and no one is to question her. She is under my protection now. Get her family secured too, if she has any. The decision was final. Dominic didn't want simple street revenge. He wanted an act of strategic, cold-blooded annihilation that would pay off a debt from his own past, punish Victor, and simultaneously destabilize a rival organization. This quiet, controlled order was far more terrifying than any loud, angry command because it signaled not just fury, but a plan. Mara looked up, no longer crying, just staring at the man who had, against her own pleas, decided to change the course of her miserable life. She had begged him not to get involved. He hadn't just gotten involved, he had declared war. And the silent, steady look in his grey eyes made it clear that war, for Dominic, was always a precise, calculated science. The drive from the Pinnacle to Dominic's private residence was usually a silent, secure blur. But tonight, the air inside the black SUV was heavy with unspoken disaster. Leo sat beside Mara in the spacious back seat, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. Marcus drove, his eyes constantly flicking to the side mirrors. Dominic sat opposite, watching Mara. Mara was wrapped in a plush, borrowed cashmere shawl from the car's emergency kit. She was still trembling, but the shock was setting in, replacing raw terror with a dazed disbelief. She was a waitress, suddenly sharing a car with the man who controlled the city and his two most dangerous men. I still don't understand, Mr. Dominic, Mara whispered, her voice tired and small. Why are you doing this? I'm just. You are staff, Mara, Dominic interrupted, his voice calm. And the Jani crew touched what is ours. That is all you need to know. Leo cleared his throat, adjusting his sharp spectacles. His usual calm was frayed, replaced by an anxious energy. Dominic, the situation just changed from a private war to a public disaster. Dominic's grey eyes, usually fixed on the future, snapped to his advisor. What are you talking about, Leo? Leo flipped his phone screen toward Dominic, illuminating the shocking headline. A customer. Late dinner. He was trying to call his Uber right outside the alley entrance, just before Marcus pulled up. He recorded everything. Not the fight, not the bruises, but the moment Dominic lifted Mara's chin, the gesture of unexpected tenderness. The headline was simple, yet devastating: feared crime boss showing softness to a waitress? The Pinnacle's owner caught in emotional alleyway encounter. "It's everywhere, boss," Marcus stated from the front seat, his voice tight. Twitter, the news sites, the local stations. 5 minutes ago, it hit the national feed. They are running the clip of you wiping your fingers and then touching her face on repeat. Dominic took the phone, his grey eyes scanning the comments and the rapid-fire analysis of the footage. The world was seeing the one thing he always kept locked away: a flicker of human emotion, a hint of weakness. The reactions were immediate and divided. The public, people were eating it up. See? Even the tough ones have hearts. Is this a setup? Or is he a secret hero? They were romanticizing the encounter, turning the alleyway scene into a modern fairy tale. The media, they were relentless, linking Dominic's known associates, digging into Mara's past, speculating wildly about a secret romance, and debating whether this was a strategic move to clean up his image. The authorities, Leo reported, his voice low with worry. "The mayor's office just called me, Dominic. They are panicking. They think you're trying to push a new narrative, showing yourself as a protector of the poor. The police chief is furious. He thinks this is a mockery of law and order." The rivals. This was the most dangerous fallout. Dominic saw the worst kind of reaction in the calculated glee of the commentators. His rivals, especially the messy, arrogant Johnny crew, would see this not as an act of kindness, but as a colossal, unforgivable moment of weakness. "They think I'm distracted," Dominic observed, handing the phone back to Leo. His face remained frustratingly calm. "They think I care about image more than control. They see a soft spot, a place to push." "It's worse than that, Dominic," Leo countered. "They see Mara as the soft spot. She is no longer just a waitress. She is the person who made the unmakeable man break his rule. She is now the most visible, unprotected weakness in your entire organization." Mara, listening to this nightmare unfold, felt a fresh wave of panic. She was no one. A ghost. Now, she was the key to unlocking a war. "I have to go," she whispered, shaking her head frantically. "I can't stay here. You can't protect me. I'll just leave the city. I'll take a bus, please, just let me go." Dominic turned fully toward her, his gaze intense. "If you leave now, Mara, you are running directly into the trap. Victor will find you in an hour. He will see you as a prize and a tool for leverage against me. Staying with me is the only place you have a chance." He then looked at Marcus, his face now settling into the hard lines of pure, decisive strategy. "Marcus, double the security detail at the house. No one in, no one out. Find out who leaked that video, not to punish them, but to confirm they have no connection to Johnny." He paused, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth. It was the smile of a predator who had been handed a disadvantage and was about to turn it into his greatest weapon. "And Leo, call the contacts. Tell the media this is not a setup. Tell them the truth, that I saw one of my own staff hurt, and I responded as any employer should. Lean into the employer protecting his worker narrative. Let the politicians talk. Let Johnny think I am soft. Let them believe the emotion they saw was genuine. The more they believe I am distracted by sentiment, the less they will fear the blade when it finally drops." He looked at Mara. "We will use their assumptions against them, Mara. You are now the centerpiece of a public scandal, which means you are also under a very bright, public spotlight. No one dares to touch something under a spotlight, not until the light moves." Mara was overwhelmed. She had gone from being invisible to being a viral sensation in an hour, and her protector was treating her life like a chess piece. The SUV finally pulled through massive, wrought-iron gates, up a long, winding, tree-lined driveway, and stopped before a mansion that looked more like a fortress carved out of granite. As the doors opened, Leo gently helped Mara out of the car. Her legs felt weak. Marcus stood sentinel, his powerful frame watching the surrounding woods. Dominic stepped out last, straightening his charcoal suit. He noticed the genuine, panicked concern on Leo's face, and the quiet, professional fury on Marcus's. He had shaken their world, too, and he knew he had to reassure them. "This is not weakness, Dominic stated, looking directly at Leo. It is opportunity. Johnny sees a soft spot. I see a chance to make them overreach. Victor hurt my property. Now, I will hurt their entire structure. He turned to Mara, standing small and fragile on the vast stone walkway. You asked who I am doing this for. I am doing this for the boy in that dark stairwell who couldn't protect his mother. I am doing this because I can. And you, Mara, will be the instrument of their downfall. He led them inside the massive house, the interior a world of quiet luxury and security systems. As Mara walked past the enormous, silent hallways, she understood one thing perfectly. She had traded one kind of terror, the intimate violence of Victor, for a completely different kind, the cold, calculated power of Dominic. She was safe, yes, but she was also trapped inside a cage of diamonds and deadly protection, the face of a crisis she never asked for, a pawn in a war she barely understood. The media storm raged outside the walls of the fortress, painting the picture of a crime boss's tender heart. But inside, under the watchful, grey eyes of Dominic, the quiet planning for ruthless, calculated revenge was already in motion. Mara had been inside Dominic's mansion for less than 12 hours, but it already felt like a lifetime. The house was spotless, silent, and suffocatingly secure. She had been examined by a doctor, a quiet woman named Dr. Helen, who treated her injuries professionally and without judgment. She had been given fresh clothes, simple, comfortable loungewear, and assigned a large, beautiful guest suite. Yet, with every expensive rug and silent bodyguard stationed outside her door, she felt less free. Dominic had left for a short meeting with Leo, leaving Marcus in charge of the immediate security detail. Mara stood by the massive, curved window of her suite, looking out at the meticulously manicured gardens that were hidden behind layers of high stone walls and security cameras. She was watching the world, or at least, the tiny, perfect slice of it she could see, while the world was watching her. The doctor had given her a mild sedative, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flashing lights of the police cars, the roaring flames, and the terrifying calm in Dominic's grey eyes as he declared war. Suddenly, her borrowed phone, a clean burner phone Leo insisted she use, buzzed on the bedside table. Mara jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She snatched it up, expecting it to be Leo with an update, or perhaps the social media feed showing a new wave of attacks. It was neither. It was a text message from an unknown number. Mara's hands trembled so hard she almost dropped the sleek device. She opened the message. The sender, Victor. The message. Look at you, queen of the news. Didn't you learn anything? You thought crying to some rich suit would save you? You just put a target on your own back, baby. You embarrassed me publicly. You made me look weak. I don't care who's hiding you. You cost me too much. When I find you, and I will, that suit won't even recognize the pieces I leave behind. Stop this lie now, or everyone you ever cared about pays. Starting with that pathetic chef who ran his mouth. The words were raw, vicious, and absolutely terrifying. Victor wasn't just angry, he was desperate, cornered, and fueled by a need for dominance that knew no limits. The threat against Luca, the kind chef who had slipped up, was immediate and concrete. Mara felt a crushing wave of guilt. Her attempt to hide her pain had now directly endangered the one person who showed her kindness. She pressed herself back against the cool wall, trying to catch her breath. The massive security detail outside the room suddenly felt flimsy. Victor was a snake, he could find a way through anything. Just as she was frantically trying to decide if she should show the message to Marcus, the phone buzzed again. This time, the number was completely different, clearly an encrypted relay, not Victor, not Leo, not the staff. Mara slowly opened the second text. The sender, anonymous. The message. You shouldn't have let him see your face. The message was chilling. It wasn't a threat of violence like Victor's. It was a cold, quiet warning, a statement of profound consequence. It hinted at a deeper, older danger, one that predated the abuse, the restaurant, and even the viral video. You shouldn't have let him see your face. Who was him? Did they mean Dominic? Mara looked down at her hands. The bruise on her jaw, though treated, was still a clear, purple shadow. It was that bruise that caught Dominic's eye, that triggered his memory, and set this entire chain of events in motion. Why? Why would someone not want Dominic to see her face? Was there something about her that linked to him? Mara tried to think back. She had worked at the Pinnacle for 2 years. She lived a simple, quiet life. She was an orphan, raised by a kind, elderly woman in her neighborhood after her parents died in a car crash when she was a child. She had no family left, no known history of drama, just a series of bad choices, the worst of which was Victor. But the text message made her doubt everything. The tone suggested she was recognizable to Dominic for reasons she didn't know. She looked again at Dominic's face in the video clip Leo showed her, the intense, calculating gray eyes. Did he look at her like he knew her? Or did he look at her like he was remembering someone else? The memory of his dead mother, as Leo suggested? Or was it something far more connected, far more dangerous? Mara felt a deep, sickening lurch in her stomach. She suddenly felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by hands she couldn't see, and that the whole messy situation with Victor was just a distraction from the real story. She quickly found Marcus in the main living area, his powerful frame filling the doorway. Marcus, with his dark coffee skin and meticulous goatee, was focused on a bank of silent monitors. "Marcus," she whispered, holding out the phone. "I got a threat. From Victor." Marcus took the phone. His sharp eyes scanned the vicious message. His controlled expression tightened. "I will alert the boss," he stated, handing the phone back. "The protection on Luca will be immediate. This snake needs to realize he has stepped out of his pond." But Mara hesitated before showing him the second text. She felt an urgent, terrible need to understand the second message before bringing Dominic into it. "Marcus, when Mr. Dominic saw me in the alley, did he seem surprised?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus paused, considering the question. He was the only person who had been there at the very start, aside from the chef. "He was surprised by the situation, Mara." "Not by you," Marcus answered clearly. "The boss sees everything. He knows every staff member. But he never stops for anyone. He stopped for you. That was the surprise." "But did he say anything about my face? About me looking like someone else?" Marcus looked at her tired, bruised face. "No. He only mentioned that the injury reminded him of a debt he felt he had to pay." "Why are you asking, Mara?" Mara shook her head quickly, tucking the phone behind her back. "No reason. Just worried about his plans." "Thank you, Marcus. I should try to rest." She walked quickly back to the guest suite, her mind racing. Marcus's honesty had only made the second message more terrifying. If Dominic didn't recognize her, then who sent the warning? And why? If the warning was about Dominic, then the sender must know both of them. And if they knew Dominic, they knew how dangerous he was. Mara locked the suite door and sat on the edge of the bed. Her parents' death had always been a closed, painful chapter, a simple, tragic accident years ago. But what if it wasn't? What if her life hadn't been simple at all, and she was just now waking up to the truth? She looked at her reflection in the dark window, the warm, brown skin, the coiled hair, the troubled dark eyes. The bruise. You shouldn't have let him see your face. It felt like a key had been placed in a very old, very heavy lock. This wasn't about Victor's jealousy anymore. This was about a secret history, a hidden identity, and a connection between her ordinary past and Dominic's deadly present that was far deeper than a torn uniform and a viral video. Mara had thought she was hiding from her ex-boyfriend. Now, she realized she was hiding from her entire life. And the quiet ghost of the past was finally starting to wake up. The panic outside the walls had stabilized, turning into a constant, low-grade hum of media speculation. But inside Dominic's fortress, the temperature was dropping fast. The quiet rebellion had begun, not with shouts, but with the subtle, dangerous coldness of powerful men feeling threatened. The core of the problem was the same, Mara. Dominic, usually a man of perfect control, was spending too much time securing one vulnerable girl. His focus was fractured, and his inner circle, the men who built his empire, felt the shift. It was mid-morning, and Dominic was in his library, a dark, heavy room of polished wood and leather. He sat behind a massive desk, listening to the two men who formed the pillars of his power, Leo, the consigliere, and Marcus, the head of security. Leo, wearing a precisely ironed shirt and his small spectacles, was usually calm, but today he looked strained. Marcus, the large, silent guard, stood nearby, his dark eyes radiating a quiet, dangerous skepticism that Dominic rarely saw directed at himself. "The situation is deteriorating, Dominic," Leo began, tapping a clean index card on the desk. "Not outside, but here. The video and the protection detail for the girl are seen as extravagant. The mid-level captains are getting nervous. They see you risking the organization for a personal vendetta against a low-level Johnny street dog." "I told you, Leo, it is not personal," Dominic said, his voice level. "It is a strategic strike. Johnny crossed a line. We respond with force and precision." "Precision is the issue," Leo countered, his voice barely rising above a murmur. "The precision is off because the target is unclear. They don't think you are hitting Johnny. They think you are protecting her." Marcus shifted his weight, and the subtle movement demanded attention. "Boss," he said, his deep voice serious. "My men are disciplined, but they are talking. They do not trust the waitress. They believe she is a plant." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes piercing both men. "A plant? She was beaten, Marcus. Publicly humiliated. Johnny doesn't use plants who look like that." "But the appearance is terrible," Leo insisted, sliding a file across the desk. "We did the deep dive on her background, as you ordered. Mara's history is clean, yes. Orphan, simple life, clean record. But look at this." Dominic picked up the file. It was a single, grainy photograph. It showed Mara, about 5 years younger, standing outside a nightclub. She was laughing, looking younger and happier than the broken girl in the alley. Beside her, his arm loosely around her shoulder, was a man. "Who is this?" Dominic asked, his tone dangerously flat. "A known associate of the Johnny family," Marcus stated, stepping closer. "Not a top man, but a trusted runner who handles their less savory transactions. He was known to frequent the same clubs as Victor. We found this picture on an old social media profile that was scrubbed years ago. It shows that before she was a waitress at the Pinnacle, she was close to people in that crew." Leo continued the attack. "She was with Victor, an enforcer. She was photographed with another Johnny associate. The consensus, Dominic, is that she is not a victim of Johnny, she is connected to them. She is either a very foolish girl whose past is catching up, or she is a spy who used her visible trauma to gain access to our protection." The weight of their arguments pressed down on Dominic. The evidence, presented clinically, did look bad. His own people were right to be suspicious. Trust was the currency of his world, and right now, Mara was bankrupting his trust fund with his captains. The anonymous message she received, Leo continued, pressing the advantage. The one that said, "You shouldn't have let him see your face." "We tracked the relay. It went through 3 layers of encryption, using a server system only known to certain high-level organized groups. Victor doesn't have that technology. This is coming from someone smarter, someone bigger. Someone who knows your past, Dominic, and is trying to use her to leverage it." Leo adjusted his spectacles, his voice dropping to its most serious register. "Dominic, she is a crisis. The war against Johnny is necessary, but this girl has already cost us credibility with our own people. You are exposing us to political pressure and internal doubt. The truth is simple, boss. She is a weakness, a distraction, and worst of all, she is potentially connected to the enemy." Leo moved his hands to the edge of the desk and looked Dominic directly in the eye, the fear of his boss's downfall eclipsing his own fear of speaking the truth. "She will be the downfall of everything you built." The air in the library became electric with tension. Marcus watched, ready to move if the boss's reaction was explosive. Dominic sat in silence for a long moment, the file still resting in his hands. He considered the picture of the young, laughing Mara and the known associate. He considered the fear in his men's voices. He considered the threat of open rebellion. He was being given an ultimatum: eliminate the perceived threat, or face the fracturing of his empire. He slowly closed the file, the soft leather sound final and sharp in the quiet room. His gray eyes, which had been so cold, softened just slightly as he seemed to look past the file, past his men, and back to that moment in the alley. He saw the desperation, the genuine, raw pain, and the memory of the young boy who watched his mother suffer the same bruises. The choice wasn't about strategy or logic anymore. It was about paying a debt to a ghost. Dominic leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. "You are correct, Leo. Dominic stated, his voice quiet, calm, and utterly absolute. She is a distraction. She is a risk. And she might be the one thing that connects me to a past I've spent decades burying. He looked from Leo to Marcus, his gaze unflinching. But if she is the downfall of everything I built, he declared, his voice suddenly hard as granite, then let it fall. He picked up the file with the damning photograph and slid it back across the desk to Leo. She stays. If she is a plant, then we will use her to flush out the gardener, Dominic continued. If she is connected to Johnny, then she will be the rope we use to hang them. My instincts rarely fail me. The fear in her eyes was real. The pain was real. And the debt I owe is real. He rose slowly, his tall frame suddenly dominating the room, radiating the power they had doubted. Leo, you will manage the captains. Tell them this, I am not distracted. I am focused. The girl is under my direct protection because the men who hit her represent the kind of chaos I refuse to tolerate in my city. Any man who questions my choice, any man who acts against Mara, acts against me. And that action, Dominic finished, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble, is unforgivable. He looked at Marcus. Marcus, double the surveillance on her. If she makes one wrong move, if she is in contact with anyone we don't approve of, you bring it to me first. But she is not to be harmed, watched, or questioned by anyone but you. Find out the truth of that picture. Find out who sent that anonymous message. Find out everything. The meeting was dismissed. Leo left, his face troubled but his loyalty confirmed. Marcus stood for a moment longer, his dark eyes meeting Dominic's. He gave a sharp, professional nod. The questioning was over. The command was absolute. Dominic was alone. He walked to the window, looking out over the silent, secure estate. He knew he had just staked his entire empire on a girl he barely knew, driven by a ghost from his past. And now, he had to live with the consequences of that shocking declaration. The silence after the meeting with Leo and Marcus was the heaviest sound Dominic had ever heard. He had chosen the girl over the safety of his structure, not out of love or foolishness, but out of a deeper, colder sense of obligation to the past. He knew the cost would be high, but even he didn't realize how quickly the price tag would arrive. It was barely an hour after his definitive declaration, she stays, when Marcus returned, moving with a speed that signaled genuine alarm. Marcus did not knock. He entered the library, his large, imposing figure radiating urgency. His face, usually a study in professional composure, was grim. Boss, Marcus began, his voice low and tight. We have multiple confirmations. Johnny is mobilizing. Not their usual muscle, either. They are pulling in their heavy hitters. Dominic turned from the window, his grey eyes instantly focused. What are their movements? Are they hitting the distribution network? The clubs? Marcus shook his head, the severity of the situation growing heavier with his silence. They are hitting the source of the problem, boss. They are mobilizing around the pinnacle and around the neighborhood where the chef, Luca, lives. They are trying to locate Mara's old apartment, too. They are not attacking the business. They are attacking the symbol. Explain, Dominic ordered, his voice still calm, but the command demanding immediate clarity. It's about respect, boss. The word on the street, put out by Johnny himself, is that you have made a spectacle of him. You, the disciplined leader, broke all the rules to shield a nobody who was connected to their side. They say you are soft. They say you are in love. They say you value a girl's tear more than your captain's loyalty. This isn't about territory or money, Dominic. It's personal pride. Johnny sees you defending Mara as an open challenge to his authority. The confirmation was chilling. Dominic hadn't just created a strategic opening, he had accidentally stumbled upon Johnny's fatal weakness, his ego. By protecting Mara, Dominic had essentially dared Johnny to look weak in front of his own men. So, they retaliate to prove a point, Dominic observed, slowly walking around the desk. They strike at the girl, or anyone connected to her, to show I cannot protect what I claim as mine. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. They want to prove they can hurt anyone under your umbrella. And the easiest target is the one everyone saw you risk everything for. The gravity of the brewing conflict settled over Dominic. The quiet chess match he had been preparing to play was now a chaotic street brawl, forced upon him by his own sentimental action. His men were already questioning him. If Johnny succeeded in striking Mara, or Luca, or anyone connected to the situation, Dominic's authority would crumble overnight. He had to respond with overwhelming, undeniable force. Dominic stopped, his shoulders straightening, the years of ruthlessness returning to his posture. His grey eyes turned to ice. "Call Leo," Dominic instructed, his voice low and steady. "Tell him the price just went up. This is no longer a private matter. This is war." "What are your orders, boss?" Marcus asked, anticipating a massive counterstrike against Johnny's core operations. Dominic's reply was shocking, even to Marcus. It was the complete opposite of what any crime boss would do in this situation. It was pure, controlled defiance. "First, the girl," Dominic said. "Mara is now the absolute priority. She is the trigger for this war, and she must be shielded at all costs. Pull the 2 squads from the west side safe houses, the Ghost and the Shield units. They are the best we have. Assign them full-time, 24/7 protection of Mara. They report directly to you, Marcus. If anything happens to her, I hold you personally responsible." Marcus stared, his mouth slightly open. The Ghost and the Shield units were the elite of Dominic's operation, men usually reserved for guarding Dominic himself or transporting millions in assets. Deploying them entirely to protect one Waitress was an unprecedented, staggering commitment. "Boss, those teams, they are essential infrastructure," Marcus cautioned, struggling to remain professional. "Removing them leaves vulnerabilities in the logistics chain. That's a massive commitment for one person, especially with Johnny moving." "That is the point, Marcus." Dominic snapped, the first crack of true anger showing in his voice. "Johnny thinks I am soft. He thinks I am distracted. He thinks he can use a simple girl to prove I am weak. I will show him exactly how much a single tear from my employee is worth. I will assign my most valuable resources to her. I will make her so untouchable, so armored, that attacking her is the same as attacking my entire, fortified organization head-on. She is not a weakness, she is now my central, undeniable strength." Marcus swallowed, understanding the cold, strategic brilliance behind the reckless move. Dominic wasn't defending Mara, he was using her as a shield to draw the ultimate confrontation. By prioritizing her safety above all else, he was forcing Johnny to either back down completely and look like a fool, or escalate the war into a full-scale catastrophe that Dominic was already prepared for. "And Luca?" Marcus asked. "Luca gets a permanent detail and his family is moved immediately into a secure facility. Anyone in that kitchen who has ever been kind to Mara gets enhanced protection. The message must be clear. Every person Johnny touches will result in 10 times the retribution." Dominic walked to his personal safe, inputting the code. He pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book, not a ledger, but a book of codes and emergency contacts. "Now, the retaliation," Dominic continued, his voice hardening into the sound of cold steel. "You hit the bars Johnny uses for his cash drops. You hit the warehouses he uses for his stolen goods. But you do not hurt any of his men. Not yet. I want chaos. I want pressure. I want Johnny to be scrambling to save his money, not his people. He needs to realize his war is expensive, and my will is absolute." Marcus nodded sharply. "Understood. The signal for war is protection, not aggression." "Precisely," Dominic confirmed. "Let Johnny think he controls the narrative. Let him think his pride is worth starting a war. But by the time he realizes the gravity of his mistake, he will be standing alone in the dark." Mara, meanwhile, was completely unaware of the massive, life-altering commitment Dominic had just made in her name. She was sitting in her massive suite, still haunted by Victor's venomous texts and the anonymous, cryptic warning. A silent, large man with the demeanor of a stone statue was now posted inside her room, simply watching the hallway and the window. Mara looked at the man's serious, expressionless face. She didn't feel safe, she felt like a very expensive, very fragile piece of cargo. She had asked him, softly, why he was inside the room now, instead of outside the door. The guard, a man named Leo, not the advisor, replied with a simple, chilling answer. "The boss says the threat level has reached maximum. You are the highest priority asset." Asset. Mara realized then that Dominic was not her savior, He was her owner in this twisted scenario. Her single, tie-streaked face had not elicited pity, but a declaration of ownership that had now resulted in a full-scale, devastating gang conflict the city had not experienced in years. The world was about to catch fire, and she, the simple waitress, was the accidental spark. The city was a mess of sirens and whispered fear, but inside the mansion, the war felt cold and contained, managed entirely through phone calls and toast commands delivered in the library. Dominic was immersed in the chaos of managing the growing conflict, but his mind kept circling back to the girl in the guest suite. He hadn't seen Mara since the night he brought her in, trusting Marcus and the security detail to handle her needs. But the conversation with Leo and Marcus, the dangerous whispers, the damning photo, had lodged a splinter of suspicion in his mind that refused to be ignored. He needed to look at her again, not as a symbol of defiance, but as the potential key to his own fractured past. Dominic made his way to her suite, the massive, silent bodyguard, Leo, the one who wasn't the consigliere, stepping aside instantly as he approached. Mara was sitting on a plush velvet chair near the window, a book lying open but forgotten in her lap. She looked exhausted, her face still carrying the slight shadow of the bruise, but the initial sheer terror had given way to a kind of weary vigilance. "Mara," Dominic said simply, entering the room. She immediately stood up, clutching the cashmere shawl around her, startled by the sudden appearance of the man who had turned her life into a war zone. "Mr. Dominic," she replied, her voice steady now, though still quiet. "Is everything all right? I heard things outside." "The city is messy," Dominic confirmed, waving a hand dismissively. "It's being handled." He didn't sit down. Instead, he took a slow walk around the room, assessing the quiet space, the immense security, and finally, Mara herself. "I need to ask you about the threats," Dominic stated. "Marcus informed me about Victor's messages. And the other one? The one that said you shouldn't have let me see your face." Mara tensed. She had hoped the confusion of the war would bury that cryptic warning. "I don't know who sent it. I swear. I have no enemies, Mr. Dominic, other than Victor." "Everyone has enemies, Mara. They just don't know it yet," Dominic countered. He stopped directly in front of her. "Tell me again about your parents. The accident." "It was years ago," Mara whispered, surprised by the abrupt change of subject. "A car accident. On a highway upstate. They died instantly. I was taken in by a neighbor. No other family. No. Just them. They were simple people. My father worked in construction. My mother was a seamstress. Nothing interesting." Dominic's grey eyes were cold and searching. "And nothing of theirs survived? No belongings, no connections?" Mara shook her head, then suddenly paused, reaching up instinctively to the collar of the borrowed nightgown. Her fingers wrapped around a delicate, silver chain hidden beneath the fabric. "Only this," she said hesitantly, pulling the chain out from under the collar. Hanging from the chain was a pendant. It was small, silver, and shaped like a stylized, three-point star, almost like a flower or a compass rose. It looked old and well-loved, the silver slightly worn smooth in the center. It wasn't flashy or valuable, but the sight of it stopped Dominic dead in his tracks. His breath hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible sound that Mara wouldn't have noticed if the room hadn't been so intensely quiet. The usual cold control that was plastered across his face fractured entirely, replaced by a sudden, intense wave of shock and raw memory. He stared at the small silver star dangling against her brown skin. "Where did you get that?" Dominic asked, his voice low, rough, and almost unrecognizable. It was the voice of the young boy he had been in the dark stairwell. "My mother gave it to me," Mara replied, confused by his reaction. "I never take it off. She said it was for good luck. She said it belonged to her mother before her." Dominic slowly reached out, his big, powerful hand moving with immense care, as if touching the pendant would break a fragile piece of glass. His fingers brushed the cool metal of the star. This wasn't just like the item from his memory. It was the item. Dominic's mind flashed back to a warm summer night, 40 years ago. He was 8 years old. He was crying in the small, cramped apartment kitchen. He had just watched his mother get hurt. And sitting across the small wooden table, trying to soothe him, was a woman who was like a big sister to him, Ilara. Ilara was his mother's closest friend, always kind, always laughing, the one person who gave little Dominic hope in their difficult, poor life. She had been the only one who defended his mother against the men who controlled their building. Dominic remembered Ilara pulling an identical silver star pendant, worn smooth, just like Mara's, out from under her collar. "It's a promise, little Domi," Ilara had told him, her eyes bright and fierce. "No matter how dark things get, this star always points home. And I promise you, I will always watch out for you and your mother." But Ilara hadn't watched out for them. She couldn't. Days later, Ilara had been found dead. An accident. She had fallen from the roof of their tenement building. Dominic, even as a child, knew it wasn't an accident. She had paid the ultimate price for intervening. Her death was the singular event that taught Dominic the cruel, cold price of powerlessness, forging the ruthless man he was today. And now, here was that same pendant, hanging around the neck of the waitress he risked everything for. Dominic pulled his hand away as if the silver had burned him. His grey eyes were no longer cold, but haunted. "Mara," he said, forcing the words out, "tell me your mother's name. Your maiden name." "It was Reyes," Mara answered. "My mother was Ana Reyes." The name meant nothing to Dominic. But the star meant everything. He began to piece together the terrifying truth. Ilara, the protector who died. The pendant that was passed down through her family. Was Mara the daughter of Ilara? Could the woman who promised to protect him have a family line that was now trying to connect with him, or was being used against him? And the anonymous text message, "You shouldn't have let him see your face." This wasn't about Mara's present troubles, it was about Dominic's past sins. Someone knew the history of that pendant. Someone knew the role Ilara played in his life. Someone knew that seeing that star would trigger a response that was reckless and emotional. The realization hit Dominic with the force of a train. Mara was never an accident. She was a trigger. She was either deliberately placed in his path by the anonymous sender, or she was a desperate relative of Ilara's, unknowingly walking into a death trap her own past had set for her. Dominic's initial impulse to protect her, rooted in a faint memory of his mother's pain, had been manipulated by the devastating weight of Ilara's promise and death. He looked at Mara, seeing not the waitress, but the child of the ghost who haunted him. He was no longer fighting Johnny over an employee, he was fighting to finish a debt he owed to the dead. "I need you to stay here," Dominic instructed, his voice low and firm, filled with a new, terrifying intensity. "You are not to leave this room without me. Do you understand? This war is no longer about business. It is about your past, and mine." He turned and strode quickly out of the room, leaving a bewildered Mara standing alone, clutching the small silver star. Dominic found Marcus waiting outside the door, his expression immediately registering the look of intense emotional distress on his boss's face. "Marcus," Dominic commanded, his voice shaking slightly with the force of his suppressed emotion. "I want the full, deep profile on Ana Reyes, the deceased parents of Mara. I want birth records, death certificates, the attending doctor on the accident. I want to know everything about their lives, their friends, every detail. Focus specifically on anyone named Ilara, or anyone connected to the old tenement buildings downtown. I want to know who gave that girl that star." "Boss, is something wrong?" Marcus asked, genuinely concerned. Dominic met his eye, the raw pain in his grey eyes quickly being replaced by the cold, clear fury of a man who realized he had been played perfectly. "Something is very wrong, Marcus," Dominic replied, his voice a low growl. "I was right. She wasn't a distraction. She was always the point. And someone just used a 40-year-old memory to set us up. We are no longer defending a waitress, we are defending the one thing Johnny will use to destroy me entirely." Dominic's command to Marcus to investigate Mara's true past, the one connected to the Silver Star and the ghost of Ilara, had barely been given when the fortress around them began to crack. The war against Johnny was already turning the city into a dangerous, chaotic mess. But the greatest danger, as always, came from within. It was late afternoon. Dominic was back in the library with Leo, analyzing the financial fallout of the first wave of retaliatory strikes against Johnny. The tension between the two men was thick. Leo knew Dominic was obsessed with the girl's pendant, and while he was loyal, his fear for the Empire was growing into quiet despair. Just as Leo was pointing out a suspicious drop in cash flow from the docks, the entire mansion was plunged into sudden, jarring darkness. The quiet hum of the high-end security system died instantly. Then, the silence was violently shattered by the sound of rapid, heavy gunfire erupting from the north wing, the exact wing that contained Mara's secured guest suite. Dominic didn't flinch. His reaction was instantaneous and cold. "The backup generators should have cut in immediately," he stated, his voice a low growl in the sudden, absolute darkness. "They didn't. This is internal sabotage." Leo fumbled for his phone, his face pale with shock. "My God, they found her." "How?" "A leak," Dominic confirmed, already moving. He was calm, terrifyingly so, as if this was merely an inconvenience. "Someone inside gave them the access codes and the window." "Marcus." "Status." Marcus's voice, usually deep and clear, crackled over the emergency radio on Dominic's desk, sharp with the sound of close-quarters combat. "We are engaged, boss. Heavy infiltration in the north wing. They came through the groundskeeper's tunnel, disabled the perimeter grid. The Ghost and Shield teams are holding them off the suite, but they are inside the walls." "The traitor cut the power and opened the tunnel," Dominic deduced instantly. "Who manages the tunnel access, Leo?" Leo's mind, despite the shock, was working fast. "Only 3 men have those codes, outside of Marcus. Yourself, me, and Johnny the Grip, your lieutenant for the dock operations." Dominic didn't hesitate. "Johnny. He was always weak for money." "Leo, you confirm that cash flow drop is tied to Johnny's operation." "Marcus, prioritize the asset. Do not let them touch the girl." Dominic turned and left the library, not running, but walking with a lethal, determined pace toward the gunfire, pulling a heavy, silenced pistol from inside his jacket. Meanwhile, the scene in the north wing was chaos. The elite security guards, the Ghost and the Shield teams, were locked in a brutal firefight against a small, highly aggressive team of Johnny mercenaries. The mercenaries, wearing black tactical gear, were not trying to kill the guards, they were trying to breach the suite. This was clearly a kidnapping, not an assassination. Inside the suite, Mara was huddled behind a massive, heavy wooden dresser, her hands clamped over her ears, tears streaming down her face. The noise was deafening, the smell of gunpowder already filling the air. The guard who had been posted inside the room, the silent, stone-faced Leo, was fighting like a demon, his back pressed against the thick, ornate door, holding a thin line against the attackers. He took a heavy blow to the side but held his ground, firing methodically. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the hallway as the Johnny team used a shaped charge to blow the door off its hinges. The force of the blast sent the guard, Leo, slamming against the opposite wall, briefly stunned but still alive. The mercenaries flooded the hallway, their eyes scanning for the target. Mara gasped, staring at the men rushing toward her. They wore ski masks, but their intent was brutally clear. Just as the lead mercenary reached the threshold, a shot rang out, not from the hallway, but from the stairwell. Dominic appeared, his silhouette framed in the dim emergency lighting that had finally flickered on. He wasn't aiming to injure. He aimed to incapacitate completely. The lead mercenary dropped, his leg shattered by a precise shot. The other mercenaries turned, shocked by the arrival of the boss himself. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to grab the girl and be gone before the main force arrived. Dominic didn't speak. He simply stepped forward, his gray eyes invisible in the shadow of the emergency light, his presence radiating pure, controlled death. He raised his pistol and fired 3 more quick, sharp shots. 2 mercenaries went down, struck in the shoulder or hip, targets that stopped them instantly without killing them. The remaining men, realizing they were now facing the legend himself in his own fortress, broke formation. They began to retreat, dragging their wounded. The element of surprise was gone, and the boss was not playing games. Marcus and the rest of the security team quickly moved to secure the area, finishing the job. Dominic walked past the smoke and the wreckage and into the suite. Mara was still trembling behind the dresser, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He didn't comfort her. He didn't check if she was hurt. He simply looked at the shattered door, the wounded guards, and the visible cost of the betrayal. "Get her to the underground bunker," Dominic commanded to Marcus, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, yet carrying the weight of ultimate authority. "Double the detail. Only you and Leo have access codes now. Nobody else." He turned and walked back toward the library, ignoring the carnage and the terrified girl. Back in the library, Marcus quickly confirmed the facts. The breach was clean, boss. A keycard was used to override the main power, and the tunnel access was unlocked from the inside. Johnny the Grip hasn't answered his comms in 2 hours. Dominic sat back down behind his massive desk. Leo was standing, pale and anxious. The money, Leo? Dominic asked, his eyes fixing his advisor. Confirmed, boss. Johnny's dock operation showed a massive deficit this morning. It wasn't an operational loss. It was a payoff. Johnny paid him to open the gate and cut the power. The betrayal was confirmed. Johnny the Grip, a trusted lieutenant for 20 years, had sold him out for money and a chance to eliminate the perceived weakness, Mara. Dominic's reaction was shocking in its absence of rage. There were no shouts, no thrown objects, no furious curses. His face was the absolute definition of coldness. His grey eyes were totally flat, devoid of warmth or human emotion. He simply picked up a smooth, dark obsidian letter opener from his desk and turned it over and over in his fingers. He chose money over family, Dominic stated, his voice a quiet assessment, like a scientist documenting a predictable failure. He chose the Johnny crew over 20 years of loyalty. Leo stepped forward, desperate. Dominic, we need to move fast. He has to be sending information now. We need to find him and contain the damage. Dominic stopped turning the letter opener. He looked at Leo, his expression unchanging. No, Dominic said. We don't need to find him. We need to send a message so profound that the others who are whispering will choke on their own fear. He put the letter opener down, placing it precisely parallel to the edge of the desk. Marcus, he commanded, his voice barely audible, yet vibrating with lethal intent. Johnny has a wife and 3 children. They live on Long Island. They are innocent. I want them secured, immediately. Tell them Johnny is in trouble, and they are under my protection. Marcus stared, confused. Boss, you don't want them punished. No. I want them safe, Dominic replied, his voice chilling. I want Johnny to realize that the moment he betrayed me, he stopped being a husband and a father. He is alone. And the price for betraying family is losing the right to have one. He looked at Leo. Tell the captains. Tell the men. Johnny the Grip is dead to us. His punishment is not death, it is isolation. He will live in fear, knowing he can never see his family again, knowing he is hunted, and knowing that every choice he made led to this lonely, miserable end. His life is ruined, not ended. That is a far more effective message. Dominic rose slowly, his large shadow falling over the dark room. He had been betrayed, his security compromised, and the entire empire shaken to its core. But his response was not hot-blooded revenge. It was cold, silent, unforgiving justice, a punishment designed to ripple through the entire organization. The city, already trembling from the brewing gang war, would now truly learn what happens when one dares to cross Dominic. His next move wasn't about the Johnny crew, it was about cleansing the rot from his own house. And everyone knew that the cleanup would be absolutely ruthless. The fallout from the betrayal and the kidnapping attempt had transformed Dominic's fortress into a place of intense, cold vigilance. Johnny's fate, being condemned to a life of lonely, hunted isolation, had terrified the remaining captains into absolute silence. The war with Johnny continued in the streets, but Dominic's focus was singular, the secret of the Silver Star. He was back in the library, illuminated by the focused beam of a single reading lamp. Across the desk sat Marcus, who had spent the last 24 hours deep diving into the history of Ana Reyes, Mara's mother, and the timeline of the death of Alara, the woman who had protected Dominic's mother decades ago. Marcus slid a folder across the desk. It wasn't the usual report, it was thin, old, and the paper was yellowed with age. Boss, Marcus began, his deep voice quiet with the weight of what he had found. We tracked the accident report on Mara's parents. Ana Reyes and her husband died exactly where they said, upstate highway, a massive pileup. But we followed the paper trail back, specifically looking for anyone who knew Alara, the woman who had the pendant. Marcus tapped a section of the report. Mara's mother, Anna, was Alara's younger sister. They were separated when they were young, during a difficult time in their family. Anna was raised by an aunt, while Alara stayed behind. Dominic's grey eyes, usually so sharp, squinted at the faded writing. Sisters, he murmured, his voice strained. Mara is Ilara's niece. That means the pendant was a family heirloom, passed from the older sister to the younger. It gets deeper, boss, Marcus continued, pushing a second document forward. This one was a copy of a children's medical record from a community clinic downtown, dating back 40 years. When Ilara was killed, the official report called it an accident. She wasn't alone. She had a daughter, a little girl who was just an infant at the time. Ilara knew the men who hurt her mother were coming for her, too. Before she died, she made arrangements. Marcus pointed to a name on the medical record. It wasn't Ilara's daughter. It was Ana Reyes. A quiet adoption, Marcus explained. Ilara's sister, Ana Reyes, who lived far away and had no connection to the city's darkness, took the baby. She raised Ilara's daughter as her own, giving her the name Mara. Dominic didn't breathe. He didn't move. He simply processed the chain of facts. Ilara was the woman who died trying to protect Dominic and his mother. Ilara died because she knew the secrets of the men who controlled the tenements, the same men Dominic eventually killed or drove out. Before she died, Ilara entrusted her infant daughter to her sister, Ana Reyes. Mara, the waitress he risked his life for, was Ilara's daughter. Mara was the child of the ghost he had spent his life avenging. The one person he owed a debt to that could never be repaid. The accident, Dominic whispered, looking at the crash report again. Mara's parents, Anna and her husband, died years later. Was it really an accident? We believe it was, Marcus said, sighing heavily. It was genuine road carnage. But here is the unbelievable revelation, boss. Look at this last document. Marcus placed a small, typed letter on the desk, the paper thin and fragile. It was a note, dated just 1 week before Ana Reyes and her husband died. It was written by Anna, addressed to a lawyer who had handled her will. Dominic read the neat, faded handwriting. I am changing the guardian instructions for Mara. I want you to make sure, should anything happen to me or my husband, that all records pertaining to Mara's birth and parentage are sealed. No one should ever know her true mother was Ilara. I have also left instructions with my contact, if Mara ever finds herself in desperate need in the city, to send a message to the only man who might care, Dominic. Tell him the star is with her. Tell him he must see her face. I know the danger that follows that man, but I trust the debt he owes Ilara more than I trust any law or police. I made a promise to my sister to keep Mara safe, and this is the only way. Dominic slowly looked up, his face a mask of profound, shattering understanding. The cold control he had guarded for decades evaporated entirely, replaced by a devastating surge of emotion. The whole sequence of events was laid bare. The anonymous warning, "You shouldn't have let him see your face," was not a threat from an enemy, but the desperate, coded call for help orchestrated by the contact Anna had trusted to protect Mara. The messenger knew that the sight of the star and the severity of her situation would bypass Dominic's cold logic and appeal directly to his buried memory of Ilara's sacrifice. Dominic's relentless, uncharacteristic protection of Mara, the very thing that threatened his empire, was not driven by weakness, but by a meticulously planned, decades-old promise. Mara wasn't an employee. She wasn't a plant. She wasn't a distraction. She was the sacred, living testament to the darkest moment of his childhood, the daughter of the woman who died to save him, entrusted to him by a dying promise. She is Ilara's daughter, Dominic repeated, his voice barely a breath. The words were heavy with 40 years of guilt and unresolved grief. I risked everything for her because my memory demanded it. I protected her because the debt of my childhood demanded it. I thought I was making a fool's choice. I was simply following a path that was set out for me before she was even a waitress. He crumpled the fragile letter in his hand, then smoothed it out immediately, treating the paper like the relic it was. The whole world thinks I've lost my mind for protecting a waitress, Dominic said, a trace of bitter, self-mocking humor in his voice. The truth is, I was simply trying to pay a debt to the one person who showed me kindness when I was a child. The only thing I have left of Ilara is her daughter. He looked at Marcus, his gray eyes now burning with a fierce, protective fire that transcended business and power. Marcus, Dominic declared, his voice firm and final. We are no longer protecting an asset. We are protecting family. Ilara paid the ultimate price for me. Her child will never, ever pay the same price. He rose from the desk, his massive frame radiating renewed purpose. The war with Johnny, the betrayal of Johnny, the threat of the anonymous sender, none of it mattered now except as a threat to Mara. Dominic walked directly to the secure intercom that connected him to the bunker where Mara was hiding. "Mara," he said, his voice deep and steady over the speaker. "I am coming down. I have something to tell you. Something about the star you wear. Something about your mother." Mara, sitting scared and confused in the cold bunker, heard his voice. It was different now, no longer the commanding voice of the Mafia boss, but the raw, emotional sound of a man who had finally found the piece of his past he thought was lost forever. "I have delivered Chapter 9, exceeding the 1,200-word target and successfully revealing the shocking truth that Mara is the daughter of Alara, the ghost from Dominic's past. Transforming the truth changed everything." When Dominic finally told Mara the story, the sacrifice of Alara, the pendant, the decades-old debt, the raw pain in his eyes was more real than any violence she had ever witnessed. Mara stopped seeing the ruthless boss. She saw the little boy who had been saved by her mother's promise. The emotional connection was undeniable, but the external danger was peaking. Johnny, desperate after the failed kidnapping and the public humiliation of Johnny's non-death, was backed into a corner. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. News reached Dominic that Johnny had planned a massive, public attack. Not on a warehouse, but on the city's annual Founders' Day Gala, a place where every politician, police chief, and news camera would be gathered. Johnny planned to kidnap or execute Mara right in the middle of the city's most visible event, proving Dominic's protection was a lie. Dominic knew this was his final move. He wasn't just going to stop Johnny, he was going to end him publicly and cement his new, undeniable role as Mara's protector, the guardian of Alara's legacy. He called an emergency meeting with Leo and Marcus. "Johnny is going to the gala," Dominic stated, looking over the blueprints of the massive, historic city hall where the event was being held. "He thinks the crowds, the cameras, and the police presence will make it impossible for us to retaliate. He thinks he can snatch her and disappear into the chaos." "The police presence will be immense, boss," Leo warned. "A full frontal assault is impossible." "We are not assaulting," Dominic countered, a cold, predatory smile touching his lips. "We are executing a transfer of ownership." His plan was a masterwork of cold, calculated precision, designed not just to win the fight, but to win the narrative. Dominic's plan was built on using Johnny's ego and the public spotlight against him. Instead of sneaking Mara into the bunker, Dominic decided to put her on display. Mara, wearing an elegant, simple black dress, a gift from Leo, purchased moments before the gala, was escorted by Marcus directly into the brightly lit ballroom. She was a vision of poised, fragile beauty, the slight shadow of the bruise on her jaw visible but fading, a subtle mark of the war she had started. She walked in with Marcus, a massive, silent shield, right onto the dance floor, where the city's elite were mixing. The crowd immediately parted, recognizing her from the viral video. Every camera in the room locked onto her. Johnny, who was already inside waiting for his opening, saw Mara. He saw her beautiful dress, the massive guard, and the public spectacle. He felt the trap closing, but his pride demanded he move. Dominic had flaunted his possession. Johnny had to respond. The attack came quickly. Johnny's men, disguised as waiters and security staff, moved into position, surrounding the dance floor. The signal was a brief, sudden blackout caused by Johnny's internal sabotage team, a repeat of the earlier trick. As the lights flickered and died, chaos erupted. Mara was instantly enveloped by Marcus and the ghost team, their bodies forming an unbreakable, moving shield. Johnny's main enforcer, a hulking man named Sael, rushed Marcus, trying to grab Mara. The ensuing fight was short and brutal. Marcus, trained in surgical defense, dismantled Sael in seconds, but not before the scuffle sent a massive velvet curtain cascading to the floor. When the emergency lights flickered back on, the scene was stunningly staged. Dominic was standing on the stage, where the mayor had been moments before. He was holding a microphone connected to a massive speaker system, his charcoal suit impeccably clean amidst the wreckage of chairs and shattered glass. He didn't fire a single shot. His weapon was the truth. "Johnny is finished," Dominic announced, his deep, resonant voice booming through the silent ballroom, carrying over the wail of distant sirens. He tried to destroy my business, and he tried to silence the truth. He gestured to the fallen velvet curtain. Behind it, tethered to two of Dominic's most loyal guards, were the exposed Johnny agents. But right beside them, in full view of the shaking politicians and flashing cameras, was the true bombshell. Johnny the Grip, the traitor who everyone thought was isolated and hunted, was tied up, gagged, and displayed for the entire city to see. Dominic looked directly into the highest-powered news camera, his face cold and unforgiving. This man, Johnny, betrayed my organization for Johnny's money. He chose greed over loyalty. But the war started long before this moment, and it started not with me, but with her. Dominic then descended the stage and walked toward Mara, who stood under the protective circle of Marcus. He reached out and gently lifted the silver star pendant that lay against her skin. 40 years ago, Dominic announced, his voice taking on a powerful, emotional depth that transfixed the room, Mara's true mother, Elara, died to protect my family from the corruption that ran this city. She died because she had the courage to tell the truth. Elara was betrayed by men exactly like Johnny. He looked at Mara, his grey eyes shining with a promise, not a threat. Mara is the daughter of the woman who saved my life. I am her guardian. And the moment Johnny or any other parasite in this city touched her, they declared war not on my business, but on the debt I owe to the memory of a hero. The truth was delivered. The crime boss wasn't acting out of weakness or love for a waitress. He was acting out of sacred, powerful obligation to his past. The emotional depth was shocking. It explained the protection, the risk, and the violence. The city-changing showdown was not the gunfight, it was the public exposure of the 40-year-old truth. Johnny, realizing he had been maneuvered, not only lost the fight but lost the moral high ground. Dominic had successfully rebranded his ruthless defense as a just, emotional act of paying a blood debt. Dominic turned back to the cameras, his face hard. Johnny is finished. His organization is dismantled. And anyone who thinks they can use the weakness of the innocent to undermine my city will find that I am not soft, I am only patient. The price of interfering with my family is absolute destruction. He then looked at Mara, the woman who was now the living proof of his redemption. The cameras captured the emotional climax perfectly. Dominic, the feared, powerful man, gently placing the silver star back beneath Mara's collar, a gesture of quiet, undeniable care. The simple waitress had become the symbol of his family, his justice, and his greatest, most profound weakness. The city trembled, not with fear of an unknown enemy, but with awe at the depth of the commitment of the man who chose a ghost's promise over his own self-interest. The old order had been shaken to its core, and a new legend, Dominic, the avenging guardian, was born. Mara, tears finally streaming down her face, looked at the man who had risked everything for her. She was no longer scared. She was protected. And for the first time in her life, she was undeniably, powerfully, family.